All right, so there was no rules. We ended up doing a 45-minute episode, which I believe covered the introduction and chapter 1. My vicious tirade on wokeness. I think we don't need to go too far into that anymore, even though I could and would love to talk about that all day. We must move on and talk about how this book develops from there. So chapter 2, which is, it's called Eliminate Certainty, and it sort of describes this idea that a lot of people have, that you should go out there and pursue failure because every success story is full of failure. And while that may be true to some extent, I think a lot of people use that whole, oh, well, it's okay to fail because failure is necessary for success. I think they use that as a get out of jail free card to justify recklessness and bad decisions. You know, there are people out there that just keep fucking everything up. They never progress. But they'll be honest about it. They'll say, yeah, I fucked up. I made this mistake. So I posit that the problem there, the barrier to success, is not dishonesty, nor is it a lack of ambition. I think it's that people are becoming very unable to discern between calculated risk and recklessness.
I really like this chapter. So eliminating the possibility of failure seems to be obvious, but again, as you say, it's oftentimes, almost a requirement of success is for you to experience some kind of failure.
Absolutely.
And I guess, there are some truths to that, but I guess from the perspective of someone who's trying to achieve a certain goal, like what would you say to them in light of this chapter and the topic, what not to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes when you're attempting something, or especially if you're trying something new for the first time that you haven't had any previous success in, you're not going to know what to do. And you are going to make mistakes. You are going to fail. Very seldom do things work out right the first time around, the first time that you try something. But you must remain always completely aware and acknowledge what has failed, and don't let it happen again. Like if you try something and a circumstance happens, whether it's your fault or somebody else's fault, the market's fault, society's fault, fair or unfair, if there is something that happens to you that has stopped you from succeeding in the past, you must make it your mission for that to never repeat. And that could be, your own behavior or your own decisions, your own impulses, your desires, your biases. The best first place to start in adopting more of the behaviors that are conducive to success is to just get rid of the ones, to get rid of all of the behaviors, get rid of all the things that you do that do not work. Because I see it time and time again. I see people that are trying so hard to achieve something more, and that could be it could be anything. It could be, financial success. It could be business success. It could even be like training for a marathon and everything like that. Like they seem to just make the same mistakes or similar mistakes over and over and over again, and then they wonder why they're not getting anywhere. And I was that person. I was the person that just kept on making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And yeah, I too had the idea that these mistakes were, just necessary chapters in a success story, and it was going to be my turn, my turn will come. I'm just going to keep living the way that I'm living my life, and then fortune will change, circumstances will change, something will land in my lap, which will make me successful. And then I realized that wasn't happening. So what did I do? I then thought, okay, well, I don't know what to do, but I know what's not fucking working. And I talk about a few examples in my book of what wasn't working. And chapter 2, I start getting right into the weeds of my drug habit at the time, which in my early 20s was, spiraling out of control. I don't think I was ever a drug addict. How I would describe myself was a drug abuser. And I think most people who experiment with, recreational drugs, and they go in with the strategy, I guess, if you can call it a strategy, of opening their mind to new experiences and to really getting into the depths of human consciousness and seeing just other dimensions, other universes, and that's where the journey always begins. But what I discovered in myself and what I see unfold time and time again with people is that it no longer becomes the calculated risk of expanding one's consciousness, and it rapidly deteriorates into chemical escapism. And I found that what started off for me was as a journey into expanding my mind, quickly became an escape from my dwindling reality. So one of the things that I absolutely needed to eliminate from my life was recreational drug use, because it was no longer serving me. It was no longer about exploring myself. It was about escaping. And at the moment I made that distinction and abandoned that toxic lifestyle, things started to improve for me massively. So, and it's an impossible fine line to walk, especially with drug use. It's very hard to make sense of anything when you're taking drugs almost every day. But I was somehow able to see that it was no longer helping. This was becoming counterproductive.
So then would the advice be to identify things in your life that either are clearly not adding to, you achieving your goals, or things that you can see the outcome of which are going to be just, again, not conducive to you achieving your goals? Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it can change. So, I think that if you start going down the recreational drug use, you can achieve extraordinary amounts of wisdom that you otherwise would not have been able to achieve. But then when it becomes no longer about achieving this wisdom and this new perspective, and it just becomes an avenue to numb your reality because your reality has become intolerable, that's when it traverses from calculated risk to recklessness.
And I suppose the popular wisdom component that we're abandoning here is as we said in the beginning, the notion of seeking failure out in order to learn something from that experience. Like, because obviously failure, you learn a lot when you fail, right? So they can be, and quite often are, experiences where you grow the most. And in Silicon Valley, there's a very popular, I guess, mantra of fail fast, iterate, learn, and then adapt. So,
and that's the thing. That's the key ingredient there. Adapt. Really, when you fail and you failed because your goals or objectives weren't met. So when you didn't achieve the outcome that you wanted, you have failed somewhere. And the key is to really go back and see what that was and expand on it and just find out what the hell that thing was. I think there is too much focus now on, it's like, oh yeah, things didn't go my way, I failed, let's just keep going. Let's just keep trying. Let's just, and as much as that's admirable, the ambition to just keep trying, I think the step that a lot of people are missing is that real, necessary introspection. That what did I do wrong? What did I cause to fail in this process? And I think people avoid that.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because in software development they've really redefined over only the last kind of 15 years a development methodology which is called Agile, which the whole approach is to develop an MVP, put it in the hands of the users, get feedback, and then iterate, and then re-release, and then put it back in the user's hands. And then see, before that there was what's called a waterfall methodology, which is basically you have a project, you have requirements, and you develop that project. It takes 2 years to build the application, and then come 2 years, the end user the requirements change because it's so long in between that time. And so what I see in your description of how people are kind of pushing through the project timeline, basically, whatever that might be for them, but they're missing that kind of, find out where you're failing fast, iterate, adapt, and continue. Instead of, I believe what I'm doing is right, so I'm just going to push on through and good things will happen.
Yeah, exactly. And and in some cases it's very clear what has gone wrong, but more often than not, it's very subtle. And sometimes what you think went wrong may not be the thing that was catastrophic to your mission or your objective. And if you're not sure what it is, you just got to focus on the stuff that is logically incongruent to success and stop doing those things. And I in the book, I expand on a couple of different ways that I was able to eliminate certain failure in a very easy to understand and logical way. When I started my financial services business, I was a mortgage broker and a financial planner simultaneously, but where I would get my first clients from was by cold calling open for inspection attendee lists from local real estate offices. So people would go to inspect a house, and you have to sign your name on a piece of paper. It was done on paper back in those days. We're talking 2008 here, so back before the age of iPads and whatnot. And they'd write the names down, and then I would go around to real estate offices and I would say, if you give me your open for inspection attendee lists and I ring these people and I'm able to sell them my mortgage broking services effectively, I'll cut you in on my commissions. And this was right in the middle of the global financial crisis. So, the real estate and financial services sectors were hurting pretty badly, and they were trying to find ways of diversifying their income streams however they could. So a lot of these real estate offices were like, sure, yeah, take these lists, and if you make any money out of it, you got to cut me in. I'm like, okay, cool. That's what we did. So then I was cold calling these people that would go to, just go to inspect a house, and all of a sudden there's a fucking mortgage broker saying, oh, would you like me to help organize your loan? And most of these people were just like, fuck you, I didn't write my name down on that piece of paper to have some asshole ringing me. But eventually it got to the point where I refined my pitch, and what started off as a real sort of scripted telemarketing phone call, I became very good at telephone sales. That was the foundation of my career. That's where I got my first ever client base, was from cold calling people. And so I figured out just through trial and error that the best times to be calling people were Thursday nights and Saturday mornings, And the reason being is that on Thursday nights, the end of the week was sort of near. People were starting to relax, but there was just
a little bit of
enough,
juice left in the
yeah,
engine.
enough mental bandwidth to make important decisions. Friday nights, forget it. No one wants to talk to some mortgage broker on a Friday afternoon. That's just for getting on the piss and playing golf and enjoying your life. Fair enough. But then I found Saturday mornings were the second best time to be calling people, because a lot of people were out inspecting real estate at that time. And yeah, these people were like, oh my God, I've just inspected a house, and yeah, actually I do need a mortgage, so maybe I should talk to this guy. Either way, it was fucking brutal. It took me 90 phone calls to get my first appointment, and then several appointments to get my first actual client to sign. So yeah, just hundreds and hundreds of unsuccessful phone calls, hours of just rejection, and yeah, it was brutal. Like I you know, as much as like telemarketing is a dying industry, and that's just not the way business is done anymore. I've got a lot of respect for people who are good at tele-sales, because it's fucking hard work. And deploying the eliminate certainty strategy for me was simply a case of, okay, if I call this person, there is almost a guarantee that they're going to tell me to fuck off. But if I don't call this person, there is a 100% chance of failure. I'm not going to get any business. I'm done. To me, that's an example of just the simplest, most logical way to think about success and failure. Doing it has a pretty high chance of failure. Not doing it has a 100% chance of failure. Always eliminate the path leading to certain failure, which is the inaction. Eliminate inaction, and at least if you do something, there might be a chance of success. That's quite a simplistic
It's a very
way
good
of
one,
looking
though.
at it.
It's a very powerful example, I think.
But if you think like that, if you always have that thought in the back of your mind, then eventually you will succeed. And then it just becomes a matter of refinement from there. Because then you apply that same thinking as to, okay, now on these phone calls that may have been successful in landing an appointment, then I get to the appointment and they didn't sign up. What did I do or didn't I do during that appointment that caused them either to sign or not to sign? And then it's a matter of refinement from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people skip that refinement. They skip it, and they just keep doing the same things, and they're like, oh, it just didn't work, didn't work. Like, well, why? Why didn't it work? And why didn't it work for you, but it worked for this guy over here? Mm. What did he do that you didn't do, or other way around? What did he not do that you are doing that is causing you to fail?
Yeah. So being a lot more, I guess, analytical of how your performance was, and then, iterating, adapting, improving.
That's right. Being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And being honest of what your strengths and your weaknesses are.
Nice. That's a good sum up of that chapter, I think.
Yeah. And I also, and just as much as it's not very gentlemanly, I also used it to pick up women in nightclubs. And my friends would, you guys know who you are. It would have been quite the spectacle to watch me floating around the pubs and clubs around the Gold Coast in my late teens and early 20s, getting rejected by almost every girl I hit on. But whether this is gentlemanly or not is irrelevant. The reality is, if you don't go and talk to her, you've got a 0% chance of hooking up. If you do, for me, it was maybe a 10% chance. But I couldn't...
Take 10% over 0% any day.
10% is infinitely greater than 0%. So if I wanted to, if I wanted female attention, I had to go and get it. There was no question about that. Then it obviously became a case of refinement until I met the best woman in the world. And then I no longer needed to deploy that strategy anymore.
Very good. So yeah, interested to see or to hear your take on how this concept applies to making business decisions for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to when you begin to think this way. It's hard to actually you don't know that you're actually thinking this way because by default your default stance ends up becoming, when things don't go right, what did I do wrong? And when you think like that and you are like honest with yourself and you are your biggest critic, and it's hard to actually imagine any other way of thinking. So, and I say this in a more general context, in that most people's attitude is to instinctively point the finger elsewhere, to blame somebody else, to blame market forces, to blame unfavorable regulatory environments, to blame their competitors, whatever the case may be, when things don't go right in business. But true richness to me is your ability to really search within. It's like what rich men do is when something goes wrong, they start retracing immediately. They go, fuck, what did I do? What did I do here? What did I do here? What did I do before that? What did I do after that? What email or phone call did I make? That caused me to end up
root
in
cause
this
analysis.
Exactly. So, I mean, one of the classic examples that I can think of is, in my own business, and I haven't spoken about this in the book, but just an example that comes to mind is that after being being a financial planner for about 11 years as an authorised representative of somebody else's licensee. So in Australia, and I believe the situation is similar in other countries, where in order to give financial advice, you either need to have an Australian financial services license, or you need to be an authorised representative of somebody else's Australian financial services license. And I found that almost all of the problems that I was having in my business were being caused directly or indirectly by my licensee. And I found that because these licensees, as they're also referred to in this country, dealer groups, as they always impose their own subjective interpretations of Australian financial services law to justify their motives, whatever they may be, commercial or otherwise, you find yourself constantly at their mercy. You have to do what they do. You have to do what they say. And because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have the power to pull the plug on your entire operation. If you fall out of love with your licensee or dealer group, you're gone. You're dead. You're done. You're out of business, basically, as I have found myself to be in that position, of which we go into in chapter 8. But so to eliminate the possibility of finding myself out of favour with a regulatory fascist, I got my own license. I applied for my own Australian Financial Services license, and now I am answerable only to the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, without any middleman in between myself and our corporate regulator imposing their own interpretations of policy. The moment I did that, my business skyrocketed, because I was no longer defending or arguing the point, having these counterproductive measures put in place in my business. So that example is not in the book, but it's just an example of where I eliminated one of the things that was causing my business to fail.
Very good. Thank you for that example. I think it's a great one. I guess it kind of moves nicely that story segues into the next chapter, which is about the debt power hierarchy. And one thing I found really cool in this story was what we talked about earlier, essentially the way how you could change your reality by changing your perception of it. And I'm really interested, firstly, to understand how the fuck did you pay off $200,000 in such a short period of time?
Yeah, especially with the lifestyle that I had at the time. So I was living like a millionaire rock star in my early 20s. And I was making decent money. Like my income was actually pretty good, but my expenses were substantially higher than my income. And I was basically plugging the hole in that with high interest credit card debt. And I got myself deep into debt. So I basically just kept on applying for credit cards with new banks. I was very rarely offered credit card limit increases. And the moment that I had access to credit, I would go and withdraw it out of the ATM as a cash advance, which back in those days, the interest rates on cash advances were 29.9%. Anyway, so yeah, when I started getting some success, I changed my lifestyle to suit, but I upgraded my lifestyle way too early. I was so confident in the trajectory of where my business was going that I thought, yeah, fuck it, I'll just take out all these credit cards to pay for all of these experiences, to pay for the big house in Clear Island waters, to fuel my cocaine habit, which was getting way out of hand at that time. I basically was living like I had already made it, but well before I had made it. But I guess the key thing that I had, the thing that I had going for me was that, and I clearly remember it. I remember seeing my bank statement at the time, and I had a really good week. I had just one really good week, and I made about $60,000 in 1 week, which is that's a lot of money to make in 1 week, especially if you're a 20-year-old financial planner that's never seen any real money before. Before going into business, the biggest bank balance I ever had was about $1,000. I had never had real money before, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to manage it, which is ironic because I was a financial planner. I was giving advice to people, but I was giving mainly in long-term investment advice, using more or less, mathematical projections, which were sound. The advice was sound, and I stand by it. It sounds very hypocritical that I was living this way whilst giving advice to people. But what I was recommending these people to do had nothing to do with the way I was living at the time. And to answer your question as to how did I pay off $200,000 worth of high interest credit card debt which was just compounding upward at an extraordinary rate at the time, was that, well, first of all, I needed not to fall into default. I couldn't let any of these banks or any of these financiers lodge a negative, a blemish on my credit file. That was not an option, because the moment that happened, you can't operate as a financial planner or a mortgage broker in Australia if you've got bad credit. So I was like, I cannot let any of these banks, put a bad credit rating against my name. So that was my mission. So the first mission was every Monday morning, I would, from about 9 a.m. till it would take the better part of a day. My weeks were started off horrendous because, first of all, I was normally coming down from a bender. I would party from Thursday night through to Sunday night, and on Monday morning I was always rough. And then I had to call all the banks that I was indebted to. And I called this part of the week the weekly creditor calls. And the idea of those phone calls was to get more time to repay, was to just plead with them, you know. So I had to get really sharp with my words. I had to get really well rehearsed in consumer rights. And when they started reading me my statutory rights, they start like telling you that they're about to basically fuck up your credit file, the phone would just cut out. And then I'd be like, the phone just cut out. Then I'd call back, and then the signal stayed really strong for the nice representatives who gave me more time to repay. So that was the first thing that I had to do, was to stop them from fucking up my credit file. Then after that, I needed to have more of those 60 grand weeks. Those weeks where I just had a really good run of consultations where, you know, I helped a lot of people achieve their financial plans, basically. Obviously, that's easier said than done. And where the real wisdom, I guess, that came into, you know, which is the basis of this chapter, the secret of the debt power hierarchy, is that the hardest part about paying off all this debt was actually keeping my credit file intact. That was the hardest part. Earning the money, I knew I could do that. Paying it off, I knew I could do that. It was stopping them from tarnishing, you know, being a formally recognized financial delinquent. So, and I speak in the book about just the come down I had, and it was following about 6 months of just not having a single day off work, not writing any new business, debts compounding upwards, and just partying my way through it. Like when I wasn't working, I was partying, and when I wasn't partying, I was working, and I was burning the candle at both ends and in the middle. Like I was fucked, basically. Had this horrific come down, and I just didn't leave my house for an entire month, and I actually didn't even call any creditors for about 4 weeks during that time, because at the time I was just done. I wasn't suicidal. I only ever thought about ending my life for pragmatic reasons, in that I never wanted to die. And I think that's an important distinction to make. I didn't want to end my life, but I just thought it would be easier. No more pain, no more suffering.
Debt goes away, these creditors go away, all my pain from these parties and the come downs gone.
Yeah, exactly. But never actually thought, I never actually did, apart from, you know, drug abuse, I never actually self-harmed or anything like that. And I didn't really even contemplate that. But the thought did cross my mind just purely for practical reasons. And I think a lot of people do go through those thought experiments. Yeah, sure. And I found, you know, that I didn't want to die. And in fact, I was like, this is not how my story ends. But I found a nugget of wisdom during this come down. And I was repeating this mantra over and over in my brain. I was like, the bank wants my money. The bank wants me to pay them money. And then it just hit me like that. I was like, wow. Who has the power in this relationship? If I owe you money, Hoani, who has the power to pay you back?
Well, I have no power.
You can do nothing.
I can ask for it.
You can threaten me, you can fuck my credit file up, you can do whatever you want, but who's the only one who can make that money go back to you?
It is you, my friend.
Exactly. So I started thinking like that. I'm like, hang on a second. The bank wants me to do something, and only I can make that happen. And as soon as I started thinking like that, and I started having these vivid fantasies of these despondent Monday morning creditor phone calls, and I started having these vivid fantasies that every phone call was like a banker coming into my office to beg me for money. please, Bryce, can I have some money? And I would basically say, no, mate, no can do. Let's reconvene and have this conversation next week. Ta-ta now. And and I'm not saying do this. I'm not saying get yourself into a shit ton of debt and spend it all on drugs and fun times and whatnot, and then have these strange fantasies of people begging you for money. I'm not saying that this is advice to live by, but what this enabled me to do is it shook to the core how I thought about debt in its entirety. Because in order to be successful in business and in investments, and if you're not fortunate enough to inherit a shit ton of money, like me and like most people, the only way that you're going to be able to really propel your business and investments forwards is with debt. And how do you reconcile, the fear of debt, or our hardwired aversion to debt? And that's how I did it. The wisdom comes from really strange places, and a lot of wisdom is born of desperation. And I found it in just flipping the power hierarchy upside down in the debtor-creditor relationship.
Yeah, I think that was interesting to read, because, as you say, so many people are scared of the idea of being in debt and being beholden to a creditor. That it almost stops them from entering into a creditor-borrower relationship, because they fear needing to pay it back, and what happens if I don't pay it back, and all of this kind of afterthought. But as you say, debt is also a vehicle to prosperity and wealth. And so was this the point in time when, I read a lot of people who were wealthy and who were successful, and they also came to a realization at some point in their lives that debt is actually working for them, not against them.
Exactly. And it is a mindset. It's the biggest first investment, financial investment, that most people will make is the family home. And for most people, unless you're fortunate enough to inherit $1 million or $2 million, whatever the price of a house is these days, if you're not inheriting that much money, you're borrowing that money from the bank. The vast majority of it, the average first home buyer in Australia is borrowing somewhere around between 80 and 90%. So if you want to get ahead in life, debt's going to be part of the journey for the vast majority of people who don't inherit a lot of wealth. And I guess I was fortunate to have this vicious experience which necessitated rewiring the way my brain thought about debt well before I even got into buying properties. This all happened back when I was about 21 years old. So when I actually started acquiring properties, I got my first property when I was 23 years old. And then just basically, since then I think we've accumulated that out to about 14 properties. But, I went into the strategy not giving a shit about debt, because my attitude was already founded in this idea that whoever is the borrower in the relationship has the power. The moment the bank parts with the money and gives it to you, you have the power, not them. They want you to pay them. You have the power, they don't. You make them play ball with you. And if you're in the financial shitstorm that I was in, the absolute worst case scenario in any debtor-creditor relationship, unless of course you've borrowed money from the bikies or or from loan sharks or whatever, they've got some other methods, of course. But if you're in a bona fide regulated credit contract, your worst case scenario is needing more time to pay. So if you assume the position of power in that relationship and you approach it with the idea of, no, you want me to pay you money? This is how it's going to be. I know I've borrowed the money from you. I'm going to pay you back. Worst case scenario is you need more time to pay. And if you're in that situation, negotiate like your life depends on it. Because I can tell you from my experience, being on the verge of bankruptcy for all those years, that if you try hard enough, you can actually stop your creditors from winding you up, tarnishing your credit file, and making you go bankrupt. Bankruptcy should be your absolute worst case scenario, the thing that you avoid at all costs. And I believe, just based on my experience, if you try hard enough, and if you assume the position of power, you will get what you want using the bank's money.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty key kind of switch that needs to be flicked in your mind to be comfortable with large amounts of debt.
Absolutely.
But as you say, is required to buy some investments that today's day and age are upward of $1 million plus to get into a real estate property.
Absolutely. And when I was growing my financial planning business, I bought 3 companies. Like I acquired 3 financial planning businesses. My first one, I believe, was when I was about 24 years old. Do you think I had the money to buy those cash up front? Hell no. I financed it. I financed the vast majority of it. I took as much credit as the banks would give me, except this time I wasn't spending it on cocaine and nights out. This time I was spending it on income producing businesses and investment properties. That's the better way to use debt. I can assure you from experience. So, and then of course, once you do that, and once you're able to keep the solvency plate spinning, and it just becomes a case of ensuring that your income exceeds your expenses with a sufficient buffer to start paying down debts at an aggressive rate. That $200,000 hole that I was in just dissipated like that. I still had a lot of debt by the time I was 27 years old, but I measured my portfolio when I was 27 years old, and at that time, that was the first time in my life I looked at my overall assets and liabilities, and I was like, "Fuck, I'm a multimillionaire." I didn't even realize it. The thing that made me realize that I was a multimillionaire when I was applying for a loan application to buy another investment property. I think it was my 7th or 8th property at the time. And then you just have to fill out your assets and liabilities when you're lodging a loan application. And I saw that the assets minus the liabilities was a figure in the number of millions. I was like, wow, I'm a fucking multimillionaire. And at that stage, the things that were in the liability column, apart from, the only debt that I had at age 27 was investment and business debt. I had no consumer debt anymore, no credit card debt, nothing. It was all the good type of debt.
Well, I think it's fair to say, like, our society is pretty financially illiterate, broadly speaking. Do you think financial education in school should be, a mandatory?
Well, I guess yes, to a certain degree. I think a lot of the stuff that kids are being taught is, for the most part, useless. And I say this, and maths being a perfect example. I love maths. I love the study of maths. I love numbers. They don't lie. Yet I don't think algebra and calculus are important for most people as they go into adulthood. Yet financial literacy is so important, and people are, as you said, financially illiterate. They may be able to measure the area of a circle, but they cannot budget or manage their finances in any sophisticated way.
Yeah, practical skills, right? Like how they're going to use them after high school, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, I
What,
guess.
What would you say to then people that are maybe financially illiterate and like you, maybe overextended with like credit card debt, whatever it might be? What would be a good approach to, try to start getting on top of your finances?
If you're in a financial hole, the first thing I recommend is call your creditors. Don't ignore them. Do not ignore the situation. It only gets worse if you ignore it. Take responsibility for it. You fucking did this. You take responsibility for it. Keep them up to date. If you don't have the money to repay them now, ask for more time. Stretch out the repayments as long as you can, and then stretch them out again. Creditors are, in my experience, surprisingly very understanding of life situations, but they hate being ignored. If you ignore them, they will be ruthless. If you keep your creditors up to date with, weekly phone calls like I used to do, you'll find them to be surprisingly accommodating. So number one, keep your credit file intact. Keep your shit together. Keep, if you're in a shitstorm, keep everything on payment plans. Adhere to the payment plans. And if you can't adhere to them, ring them and tell them that you can't adhere to it. And this is the perfect segue to the next chapter. Earn more money. If the financial shitstorm that you're in is such that your expenses are more than your income, you need to earn more income.
It's pretty straight up and down, isn't it? I feel like some people who I've mentioned this to, and I think you mentioned in your book as well, clients of yours, and I guess before we get into that, we'll just segue into the next chapter by saying, in your example, the compounding interest on your debt repayments was working against you, but the inverse of that is compounding effect on your investments work for you. And the next chapter is titled The Rule of Four.
Yeah.
And I thought this was really nice to have a practical strategy, really, investment strategy for someone to achieve a level of financial freedom within 10 years is what the Rule of Four says. And so I think if we can maybe just walk us through that, because I know there is one aspect in that talks about earning more money.
Yeah.
And I'll bring up what I was going to say when we get to that point. Absolutely.
So, I sort of almost stumbled across the Rule of Four by accident. It was when I was in university, and I was going to be a lawyer. Had my whole life planned out. I was going to be a rich and successful corporate lawyer, and I was going to be doing $100 million mergers like you see in the shows. I was going to be the young, handsome, sexy, lawyer who gets in a really cool suit and jumps in his Aston Martin and drives to his office and sits at his desk and plays hardball on with big deals and makes a shit ton of money and all of that stuff that you see on TVs and stuff. And then one day I actually sat down and actually did the numbers, and I'm like, okay, because I was miserable at law school. I fucking hated. I loved the study of law. I just hated the university environment, mostly because of the woke stuff. But and I sort of, I calculated, more or less mentally, and I thought, well, what is how much does my desired lifestyle cost me? If I wanted to have all the luxuries of life that I wanted, what does that actually look like? How much money do I have to make in order to have the lifestyle that I want? And then, even though I hadn't really studied anything involving finance at that point, I was sort of in my third year of law school when I started asking myself these questions. I computed that, that my desired lifestyle was going to cost about $400,000 per annum before tax. And the way I did that was I sort of said, okay, well, if the actual cost of my desired lifestyle is going to be 100,000. Back in those days, I thought, a lifestyle of $2,000 per week. Yeah, I'm doing okay. I can do everything that I want to be doing with that amount of income. So the rule of 4 dictates that you double it, and the first doubling is for tax. And the second doubling is because if you want to have that lifestyle in perpetuity, you are going to need to invest the amount of your desired lifestyle for a minimum of 10 years. So I'll expand on that. So in Australia and in most rich countries, if you want a lifestyle that's going to cost you $100,000 a year or more, then your before tax income is going to need to be about $200,000 a year or more, because when you're earning $200,000 a year or more in most rich countries, the tax rate is near 50%. So, but even if it's less than that I say still double it just to add a bit of a safety buffer. So in order to work out what your target income needs to be, double it. First doubling is for tax, and then double it again, multiply it by 4, so that you've got enough to fund your desired lifestyle and enough to invest for your future so that you can enjoy that lifestyle in perpetuity. And I ran a series of calculations, which I just did on Excel. And I did these back when I was about 21 years old. And what I found at the time, I mean, it sort of shocked me then, but I would probably find these revelations more shocking now if I did them. But at the time, it was just a mathematical equation. I was like, okay, well, let's say I want to enjoy this lifestyle, which is going to cost me $100,000 per annum. And I want to enjoy that lifestyle for the rest of my life. And let's allow for inflation. So this year, $100,000. Now, in order to have that same lifestyle next year, I'm going to need about $103,000 for inflation purposes. Okay, so we need to allow for that as well. Computing all of that, I was like, okay, what if I just want to give it hell for 10 years and then, do whatever the hell I want after that, and I no longer need to be earning that much money. I can, pursue other careers that, may or may not be paying that from the 10th year onwards. And I thought, okay, how much money do I need to invest and put aside, and how much return do I need to make on that money in order to to amass enough wealth to enjoy this lifestyle in perpetuity? And what I found was quite fascinating, because I found out that if you want to have a lifestyle that's going to cost $100,000 in perpetuity, allowing for inflation, if you invest $100,000 per annum for 10 years, and if you achieve a rate of return of 10% per annum on that investment, then after 10 years, you're going to have enough money to enjoy a lifestyle of $100,000 per annum after tax in perpetuity. Okay? And then I tested the theory, and I was like, okay, what happens if let's go low for the next the next scenario. And at the time, the superannuation rate in Australia was 10%. Now it's I think 11.5%. It's slowly tearing up to 12%. But at the time, it was 10%. So what happens if we want a lifestyle that's going to cost $100,000, but we only put aside $10,000 for the next 10 years and achieve a rate of return of 10%? How long will that money last from the 10th year onwards? And it was about 2 years. So, and these figures are congruent with Australian demographics. As it currently stands, the average Australian retiree has enough superannuation which in Australia is it's superannuation. In the UK, they just call it pension accounts. In America, they're 401k accounts. But enough of an investment base, sufficient to have a comfortable lifestyle for 2 years. The average Australian is working their entire adult life to save up for 2 years of retirement. That's how much the average Australian is achieving during their working life. And I'm like, okay, well that makes sense, because that is what my figures calculated. I'm like, save up 10% for 10 years and you're going to end up with 2 years of income. Let's try 50%. Let's invest $50,000 per year for 10 years. How long will that money last for? 12 years. You save up $50,000 for 10 years and you want to spend $100,000 per annum after that, you'll get $100,000 CPI'd up, and that's going to be worth zero after 12 years. I don't know about you, but I'm planning on living much more than 12 years in retirement.
Absolutely.
And then just to really test the theory, I went up to 80%. So I'm like, okay, let's just see how close this theory is. You invest $80,000 a year for 10 years. After that 10th year, you start spending $100,000 per year. It lasts 29 years, and then it's worth zero. So what that sort of told me was that, okay, if you want to give it hell for 10 years, you are going to have to invest 100% of the amount of your desired lifestyle income every year for 10 years. And then you will have that lifestyle in perpetuity. Another way you could look at it, and I like to flip rules on their head, because what I'm saying here is that, okay, yeah, you know, let's assume you can design your income to suit your lifestyle, but you can't. Well, you can with hard work, but quite often your income is just your income. That's what you're making. If you want your current lifestyle in perpetuity, whatever that may be, then you need to get used to living off half of your after-tax income, whatever that figure may be. So if you're earning, say, $100,000 per annum after tax, you, my friend, need to get used to living off 50K a year, and you need to get used to saving 50K a year. Now, you've got the very valid counter-argument to that, which I receive all the time. And I talk about the rule of four with clients and stuff all the time. And the counter-argument to that is, well, Bryce, you're only allowing for 1 decade of accumulation. You know, the reality is most people are going to be working for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. You know, so surely you don't need to save,
100% of your...
Well, yeah, 50% of your after-tax income. You know, you can probably get by on a bit less than that. And my answer is yes, absolutely. But you're missing the fucking point. You said to me you want to be rich. You want to be rich? You need to deploy the rule of four immediately. Otherwise, you're just going to be mediocre.
So when you say perpetuity, you're saying on 100 grand in perpetuity that your investments will pay you 100 grand a year and continue to accumulate.
Yeah.
To continue to pay you 100 grand a year ongoing.
Exactly. So the amount of capital that you accrue with that strategy is such that the return on investment from the 10th year onwards is far greater than the amount that you're withdrawing. So you actually, your wealth continues to grow upwards at that point, because you're just the interest or just the return on investment is exceeding the amount that you're withdrawing from the investment.
Cool. And I think in the book you say the two investment vehicles you use are property and managed fund. Yeah,
leveraged property and managed funds.
Can you explain leveraged property?
Sure. So less important than deploying the rule of four, but important nonetheless, is what to invest in. I always say to people, don't focus too much on, you do have to invest well, and you should be, chasing the best risk-appropriate returns that you can get. But even more important is deploying the rule of 4 so you can apply sufficient capital to your base, and then what you invest in from there just becomes a vehicle. But the most important thing is the rule of 4. Once you get that sorted out, what to invest in from there? I've tried everything. I've tried all kinds of investments. I've invested in all kinds of Ponzi schemes. I've been fucked over more times than you can imagine, because when I started making good money, I was like, fuck yeah, I've got money now. I can dabble. I can try all these things and see what works and what doesn't work. And what I found that almost nothing works. Like almost every investment other than diversified managed portfolios consisting mostly of blue chip shares and a few other bits and pieces, and leveraged property, those are the only two investments that have consistently performed over the decades and over the centuries. No other investment has. Not cryptocurrencies. I mean, they're too new, and I believe that cryptocurrencies are bad for humanity, and I believe they are negative sum game, and I believe that they have an intrinsic value of nothing. They're just code, and I think they're going to be something that we remark in years to come about. Oh, remember cryptos? Remember when they were a thing back in the early 2000s? Not even fine art. I mean, fine art has, in my calculations, has got, it holds its value, but the actual performance on investment's quite low. Even gold. I mean, gold has performed extraordinarily well as we speak in 2024, like early 2024. But if you look at the long-term performance of gold over the years, it's fuck all. It's like 4% per annum compounded growth. Bonds, they're attractive right now, but long-term performance on bonds is very low. Cash is trash. Don't even get me started on cash. Term deposits, all that stuff. The only two investments that have consistently performed at double-digit growth, we want to get 10% per annum over long-term averages on our investments. Managed portfolios consisting mainly of blue chip shares and leveraged property. Now, here's the thing with property. If you look at at historical averages, a balanced or a growth portfolio, so a portfolio consisting of between 60 to maybe 80%, maybe 85% in the global share market indices, a typical managed portfolio will outperform property more often than not. It's a lot more volatile. It's a boom and bust market, but the long-term averages is that it outperforms property. The only way that property, and when I say property, I'm talking about real estate, the only way that real estate can outperform managed portfolios over long-term averages is with sufficient leverage. In Australia, the average capital growth rate of property is about 5%. In some capital cities, it's closer to 4. In some, it's closer to 6. It's about, over super 100-year long-term averages, it's about 5%. So why the hell would anyone want to invest in real estate, which on average grows in value by 5%, over a typical, even a balanced managed fund? Even in Australia, a typical industry super fund will get you a good 9% over long-term averages. Why would you even consider real estate? And the answer comes in the form of leverage, because you are using the bank's money to acquire the property. If you have a property which and the sweet spot is between 70 and 80%, depending on interest rates and a range of factors. In a low interest environment, it's better to leverage the property up to about 80%. In a high interest, maybe go for somewhere between 70 and 80. That's about the sweet spot. Because if you're, for instance, buying a $1 million house with $1 million worth of cash, you're better off putting it in the stock market. But if you're buying a $1 million house with 200K of cash, then the return on your money, if that property grows in value by the average of 5%, then your 200K has just earned you 50K, which is about a gross return on investment of 25% based on the capital invested. Now, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. It gets way more complicated when you start taking into consideration the borrowing costs, the buying and selling costs of property, which are huge, the the maintenance expenses, which only just get bigger over time, all that sort of stuff. So all of those do subtract from the net return on property, and hence why I arrive at this sweet spot leverage factor of 70 to 80%. So what I'm trying to say here is that the only two investments that you need in order to have a really, really good investment portfolio are managed portfolios, ideally actively and dynamically managed by someone who is really good at managing money, and property, which is leveraged to 70 to 80%. You do not need to go outside of those two investments to be rich.
So when you say the managed fund, is there like a portion of that tied to like index? The more, I guess, the more normal the market is. So over historical averages, share market indices spend about 90% of their time in a bull market and about 10% of their time in a bear market. So a bull market is when it's basically growing in value at an impressive rate. A bear market is normally when you enter a corrective market where it spends way too much time above the long-term valuation, and it then needs to readjust itself in accordance with long-term valuations. So the more index focused you are during a bull market, the better. The more active and dynamic you are during a bear market, the better. Because the market just performs well during a bull market, and it's very hard to outperform the market. But we are right now in what I call a 10% market, where even though the share market has performed extraordinarily well in recent months, with the exception of basically the entire calendar year of 2022, but we're in a very peaky moment in time in the share market right now. So for the next couple of years, I don't believe index strategies will serve investors well. But after we have this correction, which I believe is imminent, it will, then the more index focused you can be on the rebound, the better. Okay. So if you've got, a bit of funds to invest, you would suggest, so a managed fund is, it's not direct investment in an index because, as you say, it could be part thereof, but the management component of it is, like you say, active and dynamically. Is that essentially being able to kind of move in terms of what shares you're actually...
You've got two like, there's obviously a very wide range of investment strategies, so, and everyone's got their own sort of proprietary ways of managing money, and that's what makes the whole game extremely fascinating. It's why I love it. But you got two major, I guess, distinctions in portfolio management. You've got index-based, which is passive, just go with the ups and downs of the market, go for your S&P 500, NASDAQ, and in Australia, your ASX 200 stocks, have a little bit in, cash and bonds and, real estate investment trusts, and maybe dabble a bit in emerging markets and infrastructure and that sort of thing, but mainly an investment that is mostly comprised of, S&P 500 companies. That sort of strategy is what we call an index or a passive strategy, because whatever these major indexes are performing at, that will have a direct correlation with the performance of your investment. During bull markets, that's the way to go. During bear markets, you want someone who is basically picking the eyes out of the market and going aggressive when it's time to be aggressive, but going defensive when you need to be defensive, because the set and forget passive index strategies get slaughtered during bear markets, but perform well during bull markets.
Okay.
So there's a time to be active and there's a time to be passive.
Yep. Cool.
And that's where having a good sort of financial advisor or portfolio manager, that's why it's good to have someone who knows what they're doing in that space, because the best performing portfolios, they do dial on and off the risk and the activeness of the portfolio when necessary.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. I think that's good for a lot of people who would be listening to this to understand a little bit more about, I guess, what a managed fund entails.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love it. Like when I look at the world and I look at all the news and geopolitical events, I don't really watch too much news, but I look at the world through the lens of money, not because I'm financially focused or anything like that, but because it's so fascinating to see how events, what causes they have to financial markets. It's all connected.
Yeah, it's good insight.
Mm.